Hello, today in this video we are going to talk about the atomic structure. We're going to learn how to count protons, neutrons, and electrons, as well as how to determine the charge on an ion. First off, atomic structure. There are protons, neutrons, and electrons located within the atom, and if we look over here on our graphic, neutrons and protons are both located in the nucleus of an atom, whereas electrons are located in orbitals. This diagram is a little misleading because it is showing circles, which kind of indicates that perhaps the electrons travel in orbits around the nucleus, but that is not the case. Electrons exist in orbitals and they actually move around quite randomly. What these circles are meant to show are energy levels, and we will talk much more about that later on in the year. What is important right now is that you know protons and neutrons are in the nucleus, whereas electrons exist in orbitals around the nucleus. Protons have a charge of +1. Neutrons are neutral, or they have a charge of 0. Electrons have a charge of -1. Protons and neutrons are much larger than the electrons. As such, their mass is much larger. Protons and neutrons are each said to have a mass of 1, and electrons' mass is so small that when we talk about the mass of an atom, the mass of the electrons are negligible and they aren't actually added on. So, to count subatomic particles, you are going to need your periodic table. So if you don't have that, please go get it. On your periodic table, you will be able to count protons, neutrons, and electrons with two pieces of information. You need to look at your key and determine which one is the mass number and which one is the atomic number. Protons define what type of element you are looking at. For example, an atomic number of 1 is hydrogen. That has 1 proton. So the atomic number tells you how many protons there are, as well as it tells you the identity of that specific atom. If it has an atomic number of 2, it has to be helium. Add another proton means it has an atomic number of 3. It has 3 protons, and it becomes lithium. Neutrons are the mass number minus, this should say atomic number. So to find neutrons, you take the mass number minus the atomic number. To find the mass number on the periodic table, it is the mass rounded to the nearest whole number. So if you have a mass of something 0.5, you would round up. If it's lower than that, you would round down. And electrons are simply just the atomic number as long as it's not an ion, which is essentially a charged atom. So let's do an example. Carbon. Find carbon on your periodic table. You'll find it in the second row over toward the right. Carbon has an atomic number of 6, which tells us that it has 6 protons. So carbon has 6 protons. Its mass on the periodic table is 12.01. So we would round that down just to 12, which would mean its mass number is 12. To find neutrons, it's 12 minus the atomic number, or 12 minus 6 in this instance, which would tell us that carbon has 6 neutrons. And lastly, the electrons are going to be the same as protons because they are both equal to the atomic number. So electrons equal 6. And I typically would write E minus just to give you a little reminder that electrons have a negative charge and protons have a positive charge. Alright, so sometimes we have some overriding notations, and there's two ways that these are commonly written. You can have carbon-14 or 14C. This is also carbon-14. It's just a shorthand of writing it as opposed to writing out the whole name. All that means is that instead of having an atomic number, a mass number of 12 like it did up here, that means the mass number is now 14. This is an isotope. Specifically, it's carbon-14's isotope. An isotope just has a different number of neutrons. The number of protons and the number of electrons has not changed, and you would find them in the same exact way. So for this example, carbon still has 6 protons. That's what makes carbon carbon, is the 6 protons. It has 6 neutrons still. That hasn't changed. All that has changed is the number of neutrons. So to find neutrons, it's the mass number minus the atomic number. In this case, it's 14 minus 6. So carbon 14 has 8 neutrons. And since these two are the same example, just written a different way, these numbers are the same for both of them. Lastly, we are going to figure out how to find the charge of an ion. As I mentioned earlier, an ion is an atom that has a charge associated with it. We don't say charged atoms, usually we just call them ions. And it has a charge because it has either gained or lost electrons. So to find the charge on an ion, it's simply protons minus electrons. And the reason it's protons minus electrons is because protons have a +1 charge and electrons have a negative. Each electron has a -1 charge and each proton has a +1 charge. So as opposed to remembering that to add up the charges, you can just do protons minus electrons and it's the same thing. There are a couple of different ways of finding the charge, but they get you the same answer. So for our example with fluorine, it has 9 protons and 10 electrons. So it would be 9 minus 10. So fluorine would have a charge of -1. So to write out this atom with a charge, you would write fluorine negative. You don't write -1 because in chemistry we always drop the 1. If, for example, fluorine had a charge of -2, you would write -2. But in this case, we just write fluorine negative, and it is assumed that you know that it's -1. Alright, so sometimes I can ask you to find the number of electrons on an ion. And for that, it's 2 steps as opposed to 1. You would need your periodic table because you need to know how many protons the ion has. And then to find the number of electrons, it's just protons minus the charge. So for example, oxygen -2. You would look on the periodic table for oxygen's atomic number, and you would find that oxygen has 8 protons. And the charge is written right up here. It's -2, so minus -2. So if we do that out, that will tell us how many electrons oxygen's ion has. So 8 minus -2 means ultimately you're going to add those. And oxygen would have 10 electrons. One more example, lithium plus. We need the atomic number. Looking on the periodic table, lithium has 3 protons. Its charge is +1, so minus +1 tells us that lithium plus has 2 electrons.